guys, it's Tori, and Christmas time is officially here. I can't believe it's the end of the year. It's really throwing me off, actually, that we're almost to 2020, and I feel like everybody has been saying this, but like seriously, especially the past couple of months, just October, November just flew the heck by. September was a really long month for me, but October and November were just over. It just feels like Halloween was like a week ago, and it's the last day of November when I'm filming this, so very weird, but you know, what can you do? Okay, sorry if I changed positions a little bit. I realized I had forgotten a book. So anyway, it was a really good reading month for me. Granted, a couple of the books I read this month I had started in October, so I have 4 books to talk about, but technically I didn't like read 4 whole books this month, if that makes sense. However, I wanted to start off with a book I am still currently working on, and that is Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. I mentioned this in my last wrap up. Really, it's only been like 3 weeks or so since I started this, and since I started it a little bit into November, but that being said, I'm only a little over halfway through with it. You can't really tell based on this because I haven't updated where I'm at. I've been listening to the audiobook, but I'm really enjoying it. I haven't really listened to it this week because I usually listen to it when I'm driving around places by myself, and it's been Thanksgiving break, so I haven't really been doing that as much, but I am really liking it. There are some parts I can see where people are kind of like Charles Dickens tends to have long, almost needless scenes, and I understand that he got paid by the word, so that's why a lot of his books are very long, but there are portions that have been harder to get through. That being said, I do really like Dickens' writing style. I really like the story so far, and I'm curious to see where it ends up, so it's definitely still holding my attention. I also was kind of struggling with a little bit of an almost reading slump this month, mostly with my audiobook. Like, I was just tired of listening to books. I wanted to listen to some other things, so I took a break from this. But my goal is to be done by the time this semester is over, which will be in 2 weeks from the time I'm filming this, 1 week from the time you're seeing it, but I won't give too many thoughts on that, but I am enjoying it. So anyway, moving on to the books I actually completed this month. The first book I was able to complete was Wuthering by Emily Brontë, and this is, if you don't know, this follows the story of Heathcliff, who is a gypsy boy who is adopted into this family where the father of this family treats him pretty well. Overall, he kind of spoils him actually and treats him better than his kids, which causes this sort of cycle of abuse as the children, especially the son, treats him very unkindly, and so does the mother of the family and many other members of the household, and just how that influences Heathcliff and his relationships in the future and his ever-increasing need and desire for revenge, as well as discussing, it focuses a lot on a romantic relationship. Many people will say that this is a romance, which it does have romantic elements, however, it's not really a romance you're meant to root for, it's not really characters you're meant to like, but it kind of gives a deeper insight into Heathcliff's character and why he does what he does as the anti-hero of the story, and it was really, really good. So a little bit of background as to my history with this book. I read this when I was in my junior year of high school, and it was my summer reading. So I read it by myself, and I didn't really like it. I went into it not knowing what to expect, and I almost feel like this is a book you need to have kind of an idea of what to expect in order to really appreciate it, because I just read it and I was like, wow, these characters are awful. I just hated it. It comes across very much like a romance, especially in the beginning, and so like, because the beginning is so focused on the romance in a lot of ways, as you go throughout the whole rest of the story, you're expecting to be focusing on that, and it doesn't so much, and so I just really struggled with this book. However, we talked about it in class when I got back to school, and I was able to develop just this great appreciation for this book, and it in fact became one of my favorite books of all time. But it had been several years, and actually, if you had seen during this last summer, I did my top 5 favorite classics of all time, and this was on there. However, I realized while making that video that I don't really remember a ton about this. I don't really know if I had the same feelings now, so I decided to reread it. And while I did love it, I ended up deciding it's more like a 4 stars, 4.5 stars than a 5 stars for me. And it was mostly just because there was a huge chunk in the second half that followed the children of some of the original characters. I mean, it was fine. I just didn't feel like there was anything. I just really struggled to enjoy those characters, two of them in particular. I felt like they were just spoiled, naive brats, and whereas Heathcliff is vengeful and cunning, and Catherine, at the beginning, the daughter in this family that develops a friendship with Heathcliff, she's very, well, being a spoiled brat in a lot of ways, she's not as naive about it. She's much more aware of her world, the world around her, and I understand that these children lack a lot of that maturity and understanding of the world around them because of the way their parents kind of sheltered them from it. But it was just really boring to read about them, and I really struggled with it. I was reading this with my roommates. Our goal was to read 2 chapters a day, and I just really struggled to do that at that point. And that being said, I love Heathcliff, I love Catherine, I loved Hindley and Hareton are kind of my favorite part of this dual family interweaving kind of situation. Not because Hindley was a good person, not because Hareton's the best, most likable, but I just feel like they both had so much potential, and it's interesting to analyze how what Heathcliff does to them influences their whole lives. It was really sad in a lot of ways to see these two people who had so much potential, but also being able to compare Hindley to Hareton. I don't want to specify who these people are, but you'll just have to read it to see. But Hindley and Hareton, for those of you who have read it, and how they both end up based on their individual decisions was very interesting. And so I just really like that. I do really like this book. It's just not, I think I did like The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Brontë a little bit more, mostly probably because it's just more my style of story than this one was, so that's totally personal opinion there. I could see this being better writing for sure than Anne Bronte's writing, more lyrical and poetic, but I just feel like Anne's story is something I can connect to a little bit better than this one is. But anyway, next I was able to complete Two on a Tower by Thomas Hardy, which I ended up giving a 4 out of 5 stars as well. This follows a woman named Constantine whose husband just has never treated her very well. He ends up going away to Africa and never comes back. And so she made a promise to him that she wouldn't socialize. He was a very jealous man, and so she's kind of kept to herself, but one day she ends up meeting Swithin, who is an astronomer. He's 10 years younger than her, almost 10 years younger than her. But they start up this friendship that develops into something more, and that's all I'll tell you. But I really enjoyed this one. Swithin was just so sweet, so naive and tender. Constantine I found to be very fascinating, particularly with the way it ended. I felt like the whole time reading it that she was a character that just had something more to her than what I was getting from the book. I felt like it was focusing so much on the romance, but there was just something in Lady Constantine's life or past that really cast a shadow over her, and it never really directly discussed it. It came close, and I think I can infer what it was to some extent, but the ending really made it clear. Thomas Hardy has this way of he often will create very tragic stories, but even within some of the more happy stories, there are elements that it's happy, but you kind of have this feeling maybe it's not quite as happy as it seems, and that definitely was in this book, especially again with the ending. It really made that more clear to me, and I found that to be wonderful. It was just so sweet. I just love Thomas Hardy's writing. I know a lot of people love his nature writing, but I just love his characters so much, and that was definitely true for this one. My one complaint, and why it's not a 5 out of 5 stars like The Hand of Ethelberta and Tess of the D'Urbervilles and Far from a Madding Crowd, is really because the ending, while I enjoyed the added layer it gave to the rest of the story in a lot of ways, it was just very abrupt, and I felt like it could have ended differently and had the same effect. I felt like in this one, Thomas Hardy just went for the greatest shock factor at the end in the last literally 2 or 3 pages. He just threw the stuff into it, and it was just very but why? Why did you have to end it that way? And it wasn't there are some of his books that have sadder endings, but they feel right. They feel like it's sad, but the story needed to end that way, if that makes sense. But this one just had a sad ending that I felt like it didn't need to have. I felt like it could have still been a sad ending without being quite that abrupt and intensely sad, and it would have been honestly better. I just feel like it just created a shock factor again. That was all Thomas Hardy was going for, not like actually making it a fulfilling story, if that makes sense. Like, I really like a sad ending. That's weird, but I do like a tragic ending, but I like it to feel like it's the right ending, like to feel like it's supposed to end that way. And this one just like, it just didn't. It left me wanting a little bit. And so anyway, but again, I still gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I really liked the majority of it. It definitely kept me hooked, and it definitely was better than Under the Greenwood Tree, which was the last Hardy I read, which I didn't love as much, so that was good. And next I read my one contemporary written novel, and that was Homefront by Kristin Hannah. I have read Magic Hour and The Nightingale by Kristin Hannah this year and really loved it. A lot of people talk about, do you like character-driven stories versus plot-driven stories? And I feel like I like a good balance. Like, I probably prefer more character-driven stories, but I still need some sort of good plot. But that being said, I feel like Kristin Hannah really writes amazing relationship-driven stories, meaning she focuses not only on like a specific character, but on multiple characters and how they relate to each other and how their relationship to each other influences their lives. And so it's sort of character driven, but it's not just focused on one character, if that makes sense. For example, Magic Hour really kind of focused on a sister relationship as well as a mother-daughter relationship. The Nightingale, which I'm sure many of you have read, as that's one of her more popular ones, focuses a lot on a sisterly relationship. This one focuses on a married relationship. This tells the story of Michael and Jolene, who are really struggling in their marriage. She kind of has a really difficult, scarring past that she's still coping with, and he has recently suffered a tragedy as well, and so both of them are just pulling away from each other in different ways. One day, however, Jolene ends up being deployed to Iraq. This is, what year is it? A little bit after 9/11, and so she leaves, and both of them are found in a position where they have to do things they never expected to, that are very out of their comfort zone. It's just a beautiful, beautiful story. I ended up giving this, I believe, also a 4 out of 5 stars. Apparently it was a 4 out of 5 star month. Maybe like 4.5. I cried almost the whole way through. It was a lot of emotions. I think my only complaint and why it's not a 5 stars is really just some of the characters I didn't feel particularly attached to. Again, she writes very good relationship-based stories, but I like when I'm able to feel something for her individual characters, whereas in this, I felt more attached to their relationship with each other, not so much to them, if that makes sense. And also their daughter, their 12-year-old daughter, is really obnoxious and such a brat. And it's one of those things where I realize that that's a realistic thing in a lot of ways, but I just haven't had, like, my sister and I would never, I mean, I can't really say that about me, but my younger sister is 15, and I just can not imagine her having ever been that bratty. So it's a little bit of a struggle for me to read about teenagers like that, because I'm just like, I just feel like there's a lot more good teenagers, and I feel like every time I read a contemporary book about a mother or father with their teenage girl children, especially teenage girls, they always portray them as so bratty. And I'm just like, I know a lot of them are brats, and they can be brats, but they're not that bratty. They don't have to be that bratty. Like, this girl is a piece of work. I will just say that. But that being said, it was a really good story, and I really like it, and I highly recommend Kristin Hannah's books also if you're interested in more of that genre. And the last book I read this month, which I literally just finished like 45 minutes ago, so my thoughts are very fresh, and that is The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. If you watched my video last week, you'll know that this is a book I really wanted to finish in November, and I did successfully the last day at like 8 o'clock at night. This I ended up also giving 4 out of 5 stars. I think it's more like 3.75, so this is probably the lowest of the month, but I think that's more to do with my style. First of all, if you don't know anything about this book, this basically tells the story of Mary, don't even know her last name. Sorry if I shifted a little bit, I was getting a little uncomfortable. Anyway, so this is a story about Mary Lennox, I believe is her name, yes. And she is living in India with her parents when all of a sudden her parents get sick and die. And so she is sent back to England to live with her uncle at Misselthwaite Manor, and she's basically just sort of left to her own devices, and she learns about this garden that has been closed up for 10 years ever since her uncle's wife passed away, and nobody's ever been inside. And so she really is curious to discover a way in and see what this garden looks like, and things go on from there. I thought this was a very charming story. I really enjoyed it. It was very interesting because I felt like there was some layers to it that it never directly addressed. Mostly with Ben Weatherstaff, if you've read this. There were some hints at possible drama with him, but it's a children's book, so it doesn't like really full on go into them, which was very interesting. I kind of liked that added layer to the story as I was reading. It was also just a charming story, just seeing Mary grow out of herself and learn to be a happier person. Watching a lot of people in this book learn to be a better, happier person, and how the power of the way you see yourself influences who you become. And so it was a very interesting look at very deep ideas without feeling like a super complex book, if that makes sense. It's still a children's book. I think my only struggle with this was I just am not an outdoors person. Like, it's fine, I think it's pretty and everything, but like reading all these pages about describing the garden and describing how beautiful the outdoors are and all the animals and stuff, I just struggled to like relate and care, if that makes sense. Like, again, I find plants beautiful and I find the outdoors great, but I just don't need pages and pages describing it. Like, that's not enchanting to me, and I know a lot of people feel very differently about that. So again, that's a very personal opinion. I also just felt like, I don't know, like it's one of those stories where it's a children's classic, and not that children's classics are less than or anything. Like Peter Pan I really like a lot, for example, and there's magic in those, and there's kind of a magic in this, but it's just a little more innocent. I didn't care as much for the characters as I do for some, like A Little Princess by the same author. I think I liked a little bit more. It was just more my style, I think. I just think I like focusing on people more than animals and plants. So I think that was just mostly why it brought the rating down, which might not be fair, but that's just the way it is. But I definitely recommend it if you're interested. Again, it was so charming. I loved the messages in it. I've been trying to read this book for years and have gotten like 30 pages into it every time I start it, and then I get distracted. So I was like, I just need to freaking finish this book. So I did, and again, I really did enjoy it in the end. So that is it. Those are the books I read in the month of November. Let me know down below some of the books you read in November, as I would love to know. Also, if you have any books that you plan to read in December that you're excited about, let me know. I will see you next weekend, and thanks for watching. Bye!